Okay, welcome back. We are continuing in the Olivet Discourse. We've come to this very interesting verse about the abomination of desolation. But we were looking first at Luke's rendition here because of the variation from Matthew as well as Mark's Gospel. And it seems, I think, very clear, and here's one point for the preterists, Jesus was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and he gives specific instructions to those who were alive at that time who believed in him. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that her desolation is at hand, and he gives them instructions to flee. Very same or similar instructions to what he gave to those who see the abomination of desolation set up in Jerusalem. And I can submit to you, there is absolutely no doubt, at least in my mind, that there was no abomination of desolation set up. We'll talk about what that is in a moment. There was no abomination of desolation set up in the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD, although there might be some folks that would think otherwise. But we're going to look at Daniel's prophecy. Okay, now I just want to go a few more verses, if you'll bear with me, in Luke chapter 21 before we go back to Matthew's gospel to examine the abomination of desolation. Can we begin reading in Luke chapter 21? Again, I want to read beginning in verse 20, just to get it all. I'm going to read quick, so read with me. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by the armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, those who are in the midst of the city must leave, and those who are in the country must not enter the city, because something's going to happen there in Jerusalem, okay? And it's going to be bad. Well, we know what it was. Because these are the days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Well, the Old Testament had talked about that destruction of Jerusalem. Don't have time to go into that. Verse 23, woe to those who are pregnant, to those who are nursing babes in those days, for there'll be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people, wrath of God to this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword. And that certainly did happen in the Holocaust of 70 AD, and will be led captive into all the nations. And that happened. Slaves were taken and captives were taken from Jerusalem, the survivors, and dispersed throughout the Roman Empire. And listen to this. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Wow, wow, wow. There's no doubt that this is a reference to the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Now, some take that and extrapolate it and say that's also what Jesus is talking about in Matthew chapter 24. And see, so we're not talking about the end times here. We're just talking about stuff that's all been fulfilled. That's the preteristic view. And but I'm not buying into that. As I said, I'm adopting them both. And this is really a significant scripture, though, because it says that Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Well, we saw the reestablishment of Israel as a nation after the war, Second World War in 1948, right? A miracle. No one ever thought that was ever going to happen in the centuries before, that Israel would have their own homeland. Jerusalem established as their capital, I think a few years later, and so forth, and in existence as a sovereign nation ever since then. Jerusalem would be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Well, now Jerusalem is once again, pretty much in the hands of the Jews, so there are plenty of Gentiles there. And so that to us is an indication that we're getting closer to the end. Something has happened that, it took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to happen, from 70 AD to 1948. And I forget when Jerusalem was established as the capital. I'm thinking 67, but I'm not totally sure about that. Okay? In any case, it's happened, probably in your lifetime if you were born, as you're as old as I am. I was born in 1958. Okay, so Israel became a nation before I was born. All right. Now, back to Matthew chapter 24, and let's get into the edge of this about the abomination of desolation, because I believe Jesus said both these things. He gave signs preceding the destruction of Jerusalem, but he also gave signs that would precede his coming again. And the abomination of desolation is a part of that. Verse 15 of Matthew 24. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. And he goes on to tell them to flee. Now, where do we find out about the abomination of desolation? In the prophet of Daniel. It's in Daniel, mentioned in Daniel chapter 11 and Daniel chapter 12, the last and the second to last chapters of Daniel. I brought up my old Bible here because this is going to make it easier for me. In Daniel chapter 11, this is an incredible revelation that Daniel has about things to come, particularly about the history of Israel between the years of 538 BC and 165 BC. Daniel foretold what is now history of the wars, the continual wars of successive dynasties of Egypt to the south of Israel and Syria to the north of Israel. And of course, Israel is always caught in the middle of those conflicts as kings come and go and invade each other's lands. And this chapter is so amazing and because it details, almost 4 centuries of history in great detail in that part of the world, in the Middle East, and of these nations, of which now, looking back, historians can cite, and say, oh yeah, well, that was this time, that was this war, that was this war. And for 400 years, Daniel nailed it, on all these conflicts. And so that for that reason, skeptical people can't believe that Daniel penned this before it all happened because it's so, goodness to me, accurate to what we know as history now, okay? Well, we'll go into that next time in a little more detail. But the abomination of desolation is mentioned in verse number 31. I'll just read it to you. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. Okay, now here's the question. I told you that this covers history between 538 and 165 BC, and that was actually something that did happen around 167 BC, but yet Jesus, 200 years later, said it's yet to happen. Big mystery, big question, and a big answer next time. See you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.